Evil dead in the small, forgotten town of Black Hollow, there stood an ancient manor that everyone in the village feared. Locals spoke of a dark curse that had haunted the place for centuries, and few dared to approach it. The manor was said to have once belonged to a reclusive family that vanished overnight, leaving behind only whispers of their tragic fate. Some claimed the family had dabbled in dark rituals, while others believed the land itself was cursed. One chilly autumn evening, 5 college friends, Emma, Luke, Sarah, Jake, and Noah, arrived in Black Hollow. They were drawn to the town by rumors of paranormal activity surrounding the manor, eager to film a documentary for their online channel. The group was skeptical of the stories and laughed off the town's warnings. They were excited by the possibility of uncovering the truth or, at the very least, creating some thrilling content. As night fell, they ventured into the overgrown woods that led to the manor. The trees seemed to twist and creak ominously as they made their way toward the decaying structure. The air grew colder with each step, and a sense of unease settled over the group. Emma, the most intuitive of them, felt something watching them, though she brushed off the feeling. The front door of the manor creaked open as if inviting them inside. Dust filled the air, and the silence was heavy, broken only by the sound of their footsteps. They split up, each taking different parts of the house to investigate. The atmosphere inside the house was oppressive, as though the walls held dark memories, too old and too dangerous to forget. In the dim light of his flashlight, Jake stumbled upon an old, tattered book. Its pages were brittle, inscribed with strange symbols and passages written in an ancient language. The title, barely legible, read the Necronomicon. Laughing, Jake called the others over, waving the book around as if it were some kind of joke. But Emma's unease only grew. She had heard of this book before, a grimoire of the damned, said to contain incantations capable of raising the dead and unleashing unspeakable horrors. She tried to warn Jake not to open it, but it was too late. As his fingers traced over the words, a cold wind swept through the manor, and the temperature dropped further. The lights flickered, and a distant, guttural whisper echoed through the halls. Suddenly, the front door slammed shut with a deafening bang, trapping them inside. Fear seized the group as they realized they were not alone. Shadows moved unnaturally, creeping closer as the air thickened with malevolent energy. Jake dropped the book, but the damage was already done. One by one, they began to hear voices, faint at first, then louder, whispering their names, mocking their fear. Luke screamed as he saw a ghostly figure dart through the doorway, its eyes hollow and filled with rage. Noah felt cold hands brush against his neck, though no one stood behind him. The dead had awakened, summoned by the cursed incantations in the Necronomicon. Desperate to escape, they ran toward the manor's cellar, hoping to find another exit. But the deeper they descended, the stronger the presence became. The walls pulsed as if they were alive, and the smell of decay filled their lungs. At the bottom of the stairs, they found an altar, stained with blood. Ancient symbols were carved into the stone, and in the center lay a single, rotting corpse, its eyes wide open and staring. The dead did not rest in Black Hollow. Suddenly, the corpse began to twitch, its decayed limbs jerking violently as it rose from the altar. The friends stood frozen in horror as the corpse's mouth opened, releasing an ear-piercing wail that shook the manor. The ground beneath their feet cracked, and dark, skeletal hands emerged from the earth, clawing at their legs. Panic set in as they realized the evil had been waiting for them. It was not just the manor that was cursed, it was them. By opening the Necronomicon, they had become part of the dark ritual, and now, the dead would not rest until they claimed their souls. In a desperate attempt to survive, Emma remembered an ancient spell of binding, something she had once read in a book about occult history. Trembling, she shouted the words, hoping to reverse the curse. The room shook violently, and the undead shrieked in agony as the spell took hold. But it was too late. The evil had been unleashed, and even as the dead retreated, the friends knew they would never truly escape. The manor had claimed them, body and soul. As the sun rose the next morning, Black Hollow was silent once again. The townspeople knew better than to question what had happened. The manor stood untouched, but the air around it was heavier, darker, as if the land itself was waiting for the next victims. And inside, the whispers continued. The evil was not dead. It never was. It only waited for the next to awaken it. Evil dead. The curse deepens. The quiet town of Black Hollow had never seen such chaos. Since the Necronomicon was open, the air had become thick with dread. Emma and her friends thought they had escaped the manor with their lives, but the evil they unleashed had followed them. The curse had not ended, it had only begun. 2 weeks after the terrifying night in the manor, strange things started happening in town. Animals were found mutilated in the woods, their bodies arranged in strange, ritualistic patterns. The once lively town square became eerily silent, and the few residents who remained began locking their doors before sunset, whispering of shadows moving in the night. Emma could feel the darkness creeping closer. She hadn't been able to sleep since the incident, haunted by nightmares of the dead crawling from their graves, whispering her name. Luke and Sarah, the only two friends she still kept in touch with, were experiencing the same horrifying visions. They all knew something had gone terribly wrong, something far worse than they could have imagined. One evening, as Emma sat alone in her apartment, her phone buzzed. It was Luke. "We need to go back," he said, his voice trembling. "Back? Back where?" Emma asked, her stomach tightening with fear. "To the manor. The evil we released. It's growing stronger. If we don't stop it now, it will consume everything." Emma's hands shook. Every instinct told her to run as far away from Black Hollow as possible, but she knew Luke was right. The curse wasn't done with them, and it wouldn't stop until it had claimed their souls. They gathered that night, Emma, Luke, and Sarah, armed with nothing but flashlights and the grim determination to end the nightmare they had started. The road to the manor was darker than before, as if the very stars had turned their gaze away from the cursed land. The wind howled through the trees, carrying with it faint whispers of the dead, urging them to turn back. But they pressed on. When they reached the manor, the front door was already ajar, swinging slowly in the breeze. The air inside was frigid, and the smell of decay hit them like a wall. The house felt more alive than before, as though it was pulsing with the evil they had awoken. "Where's Jake?" Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible. He hadn't answered any of their calls or messages since that night. Emma swallowed hard. "We'll find him, and end this." They made their way deeper into the manor, past the crumbling walls and the eerie silence that filled every corner. But as they reached the cellar stairs, something felt wrong, terribly wrong. The shadows around them seemed to shift, twisting into grotesque shapes that flickered at the edges of their vision. Suddenly, a low growl echoed from the darkness ahead. A figure emerged from the shadows, its skin gray and decayed, its eyes glowing with an unnatural light. "Jake," Emma gasped, her heart pounding in her chest. But it wasn't Jake anymore. His body had been taken, twisted by the dark forces they had unleashed. His face contorted into a grotesque smile, and he moved toward them with inhuman speed. Luke screamed, pulling Emma and Sarah back. They ran up the stairs, but the house was no longer a safe haven. The walls began to close in around them, trapping them in a maze of corridors that seemed to shift and change with every step. "We have to destroy the book," Emma yelled, her voice echoing through the narrowing halls. They reached the room where Jake had first found the Necronomicon, but the book was gone. In its place, the walls were scrawled with symbols that pulsed with an evil energy, as though the very fabric of reality was unraveling. Suddenly, the house began to shake. The floor cracked beneath their feet, and from the darkness below, skeletal hands began to emerge, clawing at their legs. The dead had risen once more, hungrier than before. With no other choice, Emma grabbed a piece of broken wood and began to draw the binding symbols she had memorized from her research. She shouted the incantation, her voice trembling as the dead shrieked in agony. But the evil was too strong. The house buckled and groaned, the walls closing in as the dead clawed closer. Emma's voice faltered, and just as the final words left her lips, a deafening roar filled the air. The ground beneath them gave way, plunging them into the darkness below. For a moment, everything was silent. Emma opened her eyes, gasping for breath. She was lying on the cold, hard ground, her body aching from the fall. Luke and Sarah were beside her, unconscious but alive. They were no longer in the manor. The world around them was different, darker, twisted, as if they had crossed into another realm entirely. And in the distance, the sound of slow, heavy footsteps approached. The evil wasn't dead, it was waiting, and now, it had them trapped in its world. The nightmare had only just begun. Evil dead. The cursed realm. Emma's body ached as she pushed herself off the cold, blackened earth. The sky above was a swirling mass of crimson clouds, and jagged trees loomed over them like skeletal hands reaching toward the heavens. This world felt wrong, like it wasn't meant for the living. She shook Luke and Sarah awake. Their faces were pale, eyes wide with terror, but they quickly realized that there was no time to waste. Where are we? Sarah stammered, her voice trembling. Luke glanced around, his expression hardened by fear. This isn't Black Hollow anymore. We've crossed into whatever dimension that book opened. He pointed to the horizon, where the manor still stood, but it was different now, distorted and shadowy, like a reflection in broken glass. The sound of footsteps grew closer, echoing through the twisted landscape. Emma turned, her heart pounding. In the distance, the figure of Jake, or whatever had taken over his body, was shambling toward them, his glowing eyes fixed on them like a predator watching its prey. And behind him, the earth cracked open, revealing more creatures, grotesque, decayed bodies dragging themselves from the dirt, their mouths wide in silent screams. We need to find the Necronomicon, Emma gasped, grabbing her friends by the arms. That's the only way to stop this. Luke nodded. If we can destroy the book here, in this realm, it might sever the connection to our world. The three of them moved as quickly as they could, navigating the nightmarish terrain, every step sinking into the soft, spongy ground that seemed to pulse beneath their feet. The air was thick with a foul stench, and whispers filled the space around them, voices of the dead beckoning them deeper into the madness. As they moved through the twisted woods, shapes flickered at the edge of their vision, ghostly figures watching from the shadows. The further they went, the more distorted the world became. The sky shifted from crimson to pitch black, and the trees twisted into unnatural angles, as though reality itself was bending to the will of the evil that had taken hold. Suddenly, they reached a clearing. In the center stood a stone altar, and upon it rested the Necronomicon, its pages fluttering as if alive. The air around the book shimmered with dark energy, and the ground trembled beneath their feet. There it is, Emma whispered, her voice barely audible. We have to destroy it. But as they approached the altar, a figure materialized from the shadows. It was a woman, her skin pale and cracked, her eyes hollow. She wore a tattered black gown, and her lips twisted into a grotesque smile. You think you can stop it? The woman hissed, her voice like nails on glass. The book's power is beyond your comprehension. This world, it belongs to the dead. Now you will join them. Emma stepped forward, her fists clenched. We're not going to let this thing destroy our world. Whatever curse you've put on us, we'll break it. The woman laughed, a chilling sound that echoed through the darkened sky. You are already lost. The dead have claimed your souls. Suddenly, the ground beneath them split open, and from the depths crawled a monstrous creature, taller than any human, its body a mass of writhing bones and decaying flesh. Its eyes burned with the same unholy light as Jake's, and its claws stretched out toward them. Luke grabbed a rusted metal rod from the ground and swung at the creature, but it barely flinched, swatting him aside like a rag doll. Sarah screamed as the creature's claws closed in on her, but Emma lunged forward, grabbing the Necronomicon from the altar. The moment her hands touched the book, a shockwave of dark energy surged through her body, nearly knocking her unconscious. Visions flooded her mind, of the dead rising, of worlds collapsing into darkness, of an eternity trapped in this twisted realm. But she fought against the power, pushing herself to stand. Emma, no, Luke shouted, blood dripping from a wound on his forehead. It's too dangerous. I don't care, Emma yelled, flipping through the pages of the book. She had seen these symbols before, in the brief research she had done. There had to be a way to reverse the curse. Her fingers trembled as she found the page, an incantation meant to bind the evil and close the gateway between worlds. But before she could begin, the dead woman lunged at her, grabbing her wrist. "You cannot stop this," she screeched, her eyes glowing with malevolent fury. Emma struggled against the woman's grip, her heart pounding in her chest. But she knew she couldn't fail. Not now. With a surge of adrenaline, she tore her arm free and began chanting the incantation, her voice rising above the howls of the dead around them. The world began to tremble. The sky crackled with lightning, and the creatures howled in agony as the incantation took hold. The ground beneath the altar split open, and from the cracks emerged a swirling vortex of dark energy, pulling the dead back into the earth. "No!" the woman screamed, her voice drowned out by the howling wind. She reached for Emma, but it was too late. The vortex consumed her, dragging her and the other creatures into its depths. Emma kept chanting, even as the world around her collapsed. The book in her hands began to burn, its pages disintegrating into ash, until there was nothing left but the faint glow of the vortex. And then, silence. The ground stilled, the sky cleared, and the oppressive darkness that had suffocated them lifted. Emma collapsed to the ground, gasping for breath. Luke and Sarah rushed to her side, their faces pale with shock but alive. "We did it," Emma whispered, her voice hoarse. "It's over." But as they looked around at the twisted, nightmarish landscape, they realized the truth. The evil was gone, but they were still trapped. The cursed realm had claimed them, and there was no way out. Evil dead, the endless nightmare. The realization hit them like a tidal wave. They had stopped the Necronomicon, bound the evil that had been unleashed, but they were still in the cursed realm. The dark, twisted world around them remained unchanged, as though the evil had simply merged with the landscape itself. "No, this can't be it," Luke muttered, his voice filled with despair. "We destroyed the book. We reversed the curse." Emma struggled to her feet, her body aching and her mind reeling from the incantation she had just performed. I don't know. Maybe the curse was never just about the book. Maybe we've crossed a line we can't come back from." Sarah, clutching her arm where the creature's claws had grazed her, looked at the warped sky above them. "So we're trapped here, forever." The silence that followed was deafening. There was no answer, no solution, just the cold, unforgiving reality that they were no longer in the world they once knew. "We have to keep moving," Emma finally said, her voice trembling but firm. "There has to be a way out. Maybe there's something in this world, something that can open a new gateway." With no other options, they set off through the desolate landscape, the ground beneath them shifting with each step as though it were alive. The air grew colder, and the whispers of the dead that had once haunted them grew louder, filling their minds with disjointed memories and half-forgotten nightmares. Hours passed, though time felt meaningless in this place. The sun never rose, the moon never set. It was as though the sky had frozen in its unnatural state, casting everything in a dim, eerie glow. Then, out of the corner of Emma's eye, she saw something, a flicker of movement in the distance. At first, she thought it was another one of the dead, one of the creatures that had plagued them since the curse began. But this figure was different. It moved with purpose, its form cloaked in shadows, almost like a silhouette against the dim light. "Do you see that?" Emma whispered, stopping in her tracks. Luke and Sarah turned, squinting into the distance. The figure was standing atop a hill, watching them. It made no move to approach, but its presence sent chills down Emma's spine. "Who, or what is that?" Sarah asked, her voice barely a whisper. "We have to find out," Luke said, though his voice lacked confidence. They cautiously approached the hill, the figure never moving, never reacting. As they drew closer, they could make out more details. It was a man, or at least it appeared to be. His face was hidden beneath a hood, and his body was wrapped in tattered robes that looked as ancient as the world around them. When they reached him, the man slowly lifted his head, revealing hollow, sunken eyes that seemed to peer straight into their souls. His voice, when he spoke, was low and rasping, like the wind through dry leaves. "You do not belong here." The words sent a shiver down Emma's spine. "We know that. We're trying to leave. Do you know how?" The man tilted his head slightly, as if considering her question. "The curse has bound you to this place. You cannot leave, not without a price." Luke stepped forward, his fists clenched. What price? We'll do anything to get out of here. The man's lips curled into a thin smile, though there was no warmth in it. This realm is a prison, created by the dark magic of the Necronomicon. To escape, one must offer something in return. What do you mean? Sarah asked, her voice shaking. The man extended a skeletal hand, pointing to the swirling mass of darkness in the distance, the heart of the cursed realm. There is a gateway, a portal that can return you to your world. But to open it, a soul must be sacrificed. Emma's heart dropped. A soul? The man nodded slowly. One of you must stay, forever bound to this place, to serve as its guardian. Only then will the portal open for the others. The weight of his words hung heavy in the air. The three of them stood in stunned silence, each one grappling with the impossible choice before them. That's insane, Luke muttered. We can't leave someone behind. There has to be another way. The man's expression did not change. There is no other way. The curse demands a soul. Emma felt a cold dread settle in her chest. They had fought so hard to escape this nightmare, to break free of the evil they had unleashed. And now they were faced with an even more terrible decision, one that could tear them apart. Sarah's voice broke through the silence. I'll do it. Emma spun around, her eyes wide. No, Sarah, you can't. I have to, Sarah said, her voice resolute though tears brimmed in her eyes. I've already been marked by this place. I can feel it, those claws. They did something to me. I'm not the same anymore. Luke shook his head. We'll find another way. There is no other way. Sarah shouted, her voice cracking. This place, it's already taken part of me. If I stay, you too can go, you can live. You can forget this nightmare. Emma's heart ached. She wanted to argue, to refuse, but deep down, she knew Sarah was right. The creature's claws had infected her with something dark, something that had already begun to change her. I'm not going to make it in your world anymore, Sarah continued, her voice soft now, but you too, you still have a chance. Emma's throat tightened as tears welled in her eyes. I don't want to lose you. Sarah smiled, though it was filled with sadness. You won't. I'll always be with you, in some way. But this is the only way. Luke turned away, his fists clenched in frustration, but he didn't argue anymore. He couldn't. The man stepped forward, gesturing toward the distant portal. The choice has been made. Follow me. As they walked toward the swirling darkness, Emma's heart felt heavy with grief. The portal loomed before them, a dark, swirling mass of energy that seemed to hum with the power of the dead. Sarah stepped forward, her face pale but determined. I'll miss you, she whispered, tears streaming down her face. Emma embraced her tightly, unable to hold back her sobs. I'm so sorry, Sarah. Don't be, Sarah whispered. This is my choice. The man raised his hand, and the portal began to crackle with energy. Sarah stepped toward it, her figure becoming hazy as the dark energy swirled around her. And then, in an instant, she was gone. The portal flared brightly, and Emma and Luke felt a powerful force pull them forward. The world around them blurred, and before they knew it, they were standing back in Black Hollow, the familiar sounds of the town filling their ears. It was over, but the price had been paid, and Emma knew she would never forget the sacrifice that had been made to save them. Evil dead, the Guardian's curse. The air in Black Hollow felt different. It was still, almost unnaturally quiet, as though the entire town held its breath, waiting. Emma and Luke stood in the middle of the abandoned street, their bodies exhausted but their minds racing. It was over, but the weight of their escape clung to them like a dark shadow. Do you think she's really gone? Luke asked quietly, breaking the silence. Emma stared at the ground, her chest tight with guilt and sorrow. No, she whispered. Sarah's not gone. She's part of that world now, trapped forever. They didn't talk much as they made their way back to their car, which was still parked near the edge of the cursed woods. Everything looked so ordinary now, the trees rustling in the breeze, the birds chirping in the distance. But it wasn't the same for them. Not anymore. As they reached the car, Luke stopped and looked back toward the woods, his brow furrowing. Do you feel that? Emma paused, following his gaze. There was a strange energy in the air, a faint crackling, like the world itself was unsettled. "Yeah," she said slowly. "It's like something's not right." Before they could react, the ground beneath them trembled. The trees shook violently, and the wind picked up, howling through the branches. Luke staggered back, panic rising in his chest. What the hell is happening? Emma's eyes widened as a dark shape appeared on the horizon, rising from the woods where they had just escaped. It looked like a storm cloud, but there was something unnatural about it, an inky blackness that twisted and writhed like it was alive. No, this can't be happening," Emma gasped, her heart pounding in her chest. "We left that place. We destroyed the Necronomicon, but the storm kept growing, spreading across the sky, darkening everything in its path. And in the distance, they could hear it, a low, haunting wail that sent chills down their spines." Luke grabbed Emma's arm. "We need to go now." They jumped into the car, slamming the doors as the storm closed in around them. Luke floored the gas, the tires screeching as they sped down the road, the dark cloud chasing them, growing faster and closer with each second. As they drove, Emma glanced in the rearview mirror, her breath catching in her throat. Through the swirling storm, she saw a figure, a shadowy shape walking through the darkness. It was Sarah. Her face was pale, her eyes dark and hollow, and her body moved with an eerie, unnatural grace. "Luke, look," Emma cried, pointing to the mirror. Luke glanced up and his face went pale. No, it can't be her. She's gone, Emma. She's not gone," Emma interrupted, her voice trembling. "She's the guardian now. She's trapped in that world, but it's leaking into ours." The car roared down the highway, the storm right on their tail. The sky had turned black, lightning crackling through the clouds, casting eerie shadows across the road. And still, the wail of the dead followed them, growing louder and more insistent. "We have to stop it," Emma shouted over the howling wind. "We have to close the portal, or this will consume everything." Luke shook his head, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. "How? We don't even know how it opened." But Emma's mind was racing. There had to be a way. Sarah had sacrificed herself to bind the curse, but something had gone wrong. The evil hadn't been fully contained. It was still spreading, still reaching out from the other side. Then, in a flash of clarity, Emma realized what they had to do. "We have to go back," she shouted, her voice filled with resolve. "What?" Luke looked at her like she was insane. "Back? Are you out of your mind?" "No, listen," Emma insisted. "The Necronomicon wasn't just a book, it was a key. It opened the portal, but it can also close it. We didn't destroy the book completely. We just stopped the curse from spreading. But the book is still out there, and we need to find it and use it to seal the portal for good." Luke's face twisted in horror. "You want us to go back into that place? After everything we just went through?" Emma's eyes were hard. "If we don't, the entire world will become that place. There won't be anywhere to run." Luke clenched his jaw, but he knew she was right. With a heavy sigh, he turned the car around, heading back toward the woods, back toward the nightmare they had barely escaped. As they neared the forest, the storm grew even more violent. Trees were ripped from the ground, and the sky was filled with swirling debris. The car's headlights flickered as they entered the woods, the oppressive darkness pressing in on all sides. Emma's heart pounded in her chest as they reached the clearing where it had all started. The ancient cabin stood in the distance, its windows dark and lifeless, yet somehow exuding a sense of malevolence. The ground around it was cracked and scorched, as though the very earth had been tainted by the evil that had been unleashed. They stepped out of the car, the storm raging around them, and Emma could feel the weight of the curse pressing down on her. The whispers were louder now, filling her head with incoherent voices, each one pleading, screaming, laughing. "We need to find the book," Emma said, her voice barely audible over the wind. "It's the only way." They made their way toward the cabin, their steps slow and deliberate, as though the very ground was fighting against them. The door creaked open as they approached, and the inside was just as they remembered, dark, decaying, and filled with the lingering presence of evil. Luke shuddered as they entered the cabin, his eyes scanning the room for any sign of the Necronomicon. "Where do we even start?" Emma moved toward the fireplace, her eyes narrowing as she spotted something half buried in the ashes. She reached down, her fingers brushing against the familiar, leathery cover of the book. "I found it," she whispered, pulling the Necronomicon free from the ashes. The moment she touched it, the air grew even colder, and the whispers intensified, filling her head with images of death, pain, and suffering. But she gritted her teeth, refusing to let the evil overtake her. "We have to read the incantation," Emma said, her voice steady despite the terror gnawing at her insides. "It's the only way to close the portal." Luke nodded, though his face was pale with fear. "Do it." With shaking hands, Emma opened the book, the ancient pages crackling beneath her fingers. She scanned the symbols, the dark words etched into the parchment, and began to speak the incantation. As she spoke, the storm outside grew even more ferocious, and the cabin shook violently. The shadows around them twisted and writhed, as though the very darkness was coming alive. Suddenly, the air was filled with a deafening roar, and the ground beneath them split open, revealing a swirling vortex of darkness. "The portal," Emma's voice faltered as the dark energy swirled around them, threatening to pull them in. But she pushed forward, her voice rising above the chaos as she spoke the final words of the incantation. The vortex screamed in protest, the swirling energy pulling at the fabric of reality itself. And then, with a blinding flash of light, the portal collapsed in on itself, sealing the tear between the worlds. The storm stopped, the whispers ceased, and the oppressive weight of the curse lifted. Emma and Luke stood in stunned silence, their bodies trembling with exhaustion and relief. It was over. The evil had been sealed away, and the portal had been closed. But as they left the cabin, Emma couldn't shake the feeling that something was still watching them, lurking just beyond the veil of reality, waiting for its chance to return. The evil was never truly gone. It was only sleeping, evil dead. The return of darkness months passed after Emma and Luke sealed the portal. Life returned to normal, or at least it seemed that way. Black Hollow had returned to its quiet, sleepy state. The woods stood as they always had, though few dared venture into them anymore. Emma and Luke had moved on, trying to live without constantly looking over their shoulders. But the nightmares never stopped. Every night, Emma woke drenched in sweat, her mind filled with twisted images of the cabin, the book, and the swirling darkness. Each time, it felt more real, as if something was pulling her back. It was late one evening when the phone rang, waking Emma from yet another nightmare. Groggy and disoriented, she picked up. On the other end was Luke, his voice tense. "Emma, something's wrong." Her stomach twisted. "What do you mean?" I had a dream." It was so real. The cabin, the woods, the book, it was all there. "But this time, I saw Sarah." Emma froze, her breath catching in her throat. Sarah, the friend they had lost to the curse. The one they thought was trapped forever in that otherworldly prison. What did she say? She was warning as she said the portal was never fully sealed. That it's opening again. Emma's blood ran cold. She had felt it too. In her dreams, the creeping sensation that the evil wasn't done with them. "We have to go back," she whispered, already dreading the words. Luke didn't argue. He knew as well as she did that their fight with the darkness was far from over. 2 days later, they were standing once more at the edge of the cursed woods. The trees looked just as foreboding as before, their twisted branches reaching out like skeletal hands. The silence was suffocating, and the air held a strange stillness, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. "Are you sure about this?" Luke asked, his face pale and tense. Emma nodded, though her heart was racing. "We have to be. If Sarah's right, then the evil's already started to spread again. We need to stop it before it consumes everything." They stepped into the woods, the dense foliage closing in around them like a living entity. Every sound, the crunch of leaves, the snap of twigs, felt amplified in the oppressive quiet. As they walked deeper, the atmosphere grew heavier, and the familiar sense of dread began to settle in their bones. The cabin loomed in the distance, dark and silent, just as they remembered it. But something felt different this time. The air around the cabin seemed to shimmer, like a mirage, and a faint, ominous hum vibrated in the air. As they approached, Emma's breath caught in her throat. The door to the cabin was wide open, as if inviting them inside. "This doesn't feel right," Luke muttered, glancing at Emma. "It's like it's waiting for us." Emma clenched her fists, steeling herself. "We don't have a choice." They stepped into the cabin, the floor creaking beneath their feet. The room was exactly as they had left it, the dusty furniture, the broken windows, and the charred remnants of the Necronomicon lying in the fireplace. But the air was thick with a palpable sense of malevolence, as if the walls themselves were soaked in evil. And then, from the shadows, they heard it, a low, guttural whisper that sent chills down their spines. "Welcome back." Emma and Luke froze, their hearts pounding in their chests. The voice was faint, disembodied, but unmistakably familiar. "Sarah," Emma called out, her voice trembling. From the darkness, a figure emerged, Sarah, or at least what was left of her. Her skin was pale, almost translucent, her eyes hollow and dark. She moved with an unnatural grace, her limbs bending at odd angles as she stepped into the light. "You shouldn't have come back," Sarah whispered, her voice echoing with a strange, ethereal quality. Emma's heart ached at the sight of her friend, twisted and corrupted by the evil that had consumed her. "We had no choice," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "The portal, it's opening again, isn't it?" Sarah nodded slowly, her gaze distant. "The curse was never fully broken. The evil still lingers, waiting for its chance to return. And now, it's stronger than ever." Luke stepped forward, his fists clenched. "How do we stop it? How do we seal it for good?" Sarah's expression darkened, her hollow eyes locking onto his. "You can't, not this time." Before they could react, the cabin erupted in chaos. The walls shook violently, the floorboards splintering beneath their feet. Shadows writhed in the corners of the room, taking shape and form, twisting into grotesque figures with glowing red eyes. The darkness had returned. Luke grabbed Emma's arm, pulling her toward the door, but it slammed shut with a deafening bang, trapping them inside. The shadows closed in around them, their inhuman whispers filling the air. "Emma," Luke shouted, his voice barely audible over the cacophony. "We have to get out of here." But Emma wasn't listening. Her eyes were locked on Sarah, who stood in the center of the room, her body rigid, as if she were fighting something deep inside herself. You have to leave," Sarah whispered, her voice strained. "It's too late for me, but you can still escape." Tears welled up in Emma's eyes. "We're not leaving you behind, Sarah." Sarah shook her head, her body trembling. "You don't understand. I'm part of it now. I can't leave. But you can stop it. The book, the Necronomicon. You have to destroy it. Completely. This time, it's the only way." Emma glanced at the charred remnants of the book in the fireplace, her mind racing. Could it really be that simple? Or was it a trap? Before she could make a decision, the shadows surged forward, their twisted forms lunging at them. Luke fought them off as best he could, but there were too many, their cold, unnatural hands clawing at him. "Emma, do something," he shouted, panic rising in his voice. With no other choice, Emma ran to the fireplace, grabbing the remnants of the Necronomicon. The moment her fingers touched the book, a surge of dark energy shot through her, almost knocking her off her feet. The whispers grew louder, filling her mind with thoughts of death, pain, and madness. But she pushed through it, her resolve unshaken. With trembling hands, she held the book over the fire, watching as the flames licked at its edges. "No." The shadows screeched in unison, their voices rising in a deafening chorus. But it was too late. The Necronomicon burst into flames, its pages curling and turning to ash. The moment the book was destroyed, the shadows let out a final, agonized wail before vanishing into the darkness. The cabin fell silent, the air heavy with the smell of smoke and ash. Emma collapsed to the floor, her body trembling with exhaustion. Luke rushed to her side, pulling her into his arms. "It's over," he whispered, his voice shaky. "It's finally over." But as they left the cabin, the hairs on the back of Emma's neck stood on end. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was still watching them, lurking just beyond the veil of reality. Because in the world of the dead, nothing ever truly dies. As Emma and Luke stumbled out of the cabin, the oppressive weight of the forest seemed to lift momentarily. The sunlight filtered through the trees, casting a warm glow over the desolate landscape, but a nagging unease clung to the air. They walked in silence, each step away from the cabin feeling both liberating and haunting. The memories of the darkness that had gripped them were still fresh, and the loss of Sarah lingered like a shadow over their hearts. Once they reached the edge of the woods, Emma turned to Luke, her brow furrowed with concern. "What if we didn't destroy it? What if we just angered it?" Luke shook his head, his face etched with determination. "We did what we had to do. We ended the threat before it could spread further." "But I don't think it's truly over." His words hung in the air, heavy with foreboding. Emma's heart raced. She felt it too, a dark presence lurking just beneath the surface, waiting for the right moment to strike. That night, Emma lay awake, staring at the ceiling of her bedroom, the shadows creeping in from the corners like the specters of her past. She could hear the wind howling outside, echoing the whispers she had once heard in the cabin. Suddenly, her phone buzzed on the nightstand, shattering the silence. Heart pounding, she grabbed at a message from an unknown number lit up the screen. "You think you're safe? The darkness never forgets." Her blood ran cold. Emma's fingers trembled as she typed a response. Who was this? But there was no reply. Instead, a chill swept through her room, and she could have sworn she saw the shadow of a figure in the corner. She quickly turned on the light, but nothing was there. Just the empty room, heavy with the weight of her dread. The next day, Emma and Luke decided to investigate further. They returned to Black Hollow, this time armed with flashlights, a camera, and a determination to confront whatever lingered from their past. The townspeople had been quiet about the cabin, almost as if they were in on some unspoken agreement to forget the horror that had unfolded. They made their way back to the cabin, but the journey felt different now. The air was thick with anticipation, as if the forest itself were holding its breath. When they arrived, they found the cabin just as they had left it, though the air felt charged with a palpable energy. As they stepped inside, Emma's heart raced. "What are we looking for?" she whispered. Luke shrugged, his eyes scanning the room. "Anything. Signs that the evil is still here." Suddenly, Emma's gaze landed on the fireplace. The remnants of the Necronomicon were gone, leaving only a few scattered ashes. She stepped closer, her stomach knotting with unease. Then, from the corner of her eye, she spotted something glimmering beneath a loose floorboard. She knelt down and pried it open, revealing an old, tattered journal. "Luke, look at this," she said, holding it up. He joined her, his expression shifting from curiosity to concern as he saw the journal's cover. "It looks ancient. Do you think it belonged to the original owner of the cabin?" As Emma flipped through the pages, her eyes widened. The handwriting was erratic, frantic, detailing rituals, incantations, and sketches of grotesque creatures. "Listen to this," she said, reading aloud. "The darkness is a living entity. It feeds on fear, on pain. To sever its hold, one must confront it in the depths of despair." Luke frowned. "What does that mean? How do we confront something like that?" Emma's mind raced. What if we have to go back to where it all began? The source of the evil. The thought made her stomach turn, but deep down, she felt it was their only option. They needed to understand the darkness fully to destroy it once and for all. That night, they prepared for their journey back into the heart of the woods. As they packed their bags, Emma received another message from the unknown number. "You'll never escape it, it's in you." Her heart sank, fear clawing at her throat. She showed the message to Luke, and he paled. "We have to go now, it's warning us." As they ventured into the woods once more, the air felt electric, charged with the energy of what lay ahead. The shadows grew thicker, wrapping around them like tendrils, whispering their dark secrets. When they reached the clearing where the portal had once opened, Emma and Luke stood side by side, their hearts pounding. "This is it," Luke said, his voice barely above a whisper. They could feel the pulsating energy beneath their feet, a sickly warmth radiating from the earth. Emma closed her eyes, trying to center herself, to find strength in the memories of her friends and the love they shared. Suddenly, the ground shook violently, and the air filled with the howling of tormented souls. Shadows twisted and danced around them, taking on forms of the people they had lost, faces twisted in agony. "Emma!" Luke shouted, trying to keep his footing as the ground quaked. Emma felt a surge of anger. "You won't take us again," she yelled, her voice rising above the chaos. As if in response, the shadows surged forward, but Emma held her ground. She recalled the words from the journal, the power within them. To sever its hold, one must confront it in the depths of despair. With a fierce determination, Emma reached deep within herself, confronting her fears, her guilt over Sarah's death, her regret over their actions, and the darkness that threatened to consume her. "Enough!" she screamed, drawing upon the love she had for her friends, the hope that still flickered within her heart. The shadows hesitated, their forms flickering as Emma's energy pushed against them. Luke joined her, channeling his own strength, his voice steady and resolute. Together, he shouted, and they began to chant the incantations from the journal, their voices weaving together in a powerful symphony. The ground shook violently, and the shadows writhed in agony as the light from their combined strength pierced through the darkness. With one final shout, they unleashed their energy, a blinding wave of light radiating from their hands. The darkness roared, a cacophony of anguished screams filling the air as it was forced back, sucked into the depths of the earth. The ground settled, and the silence that followed was deafening. Emma and Luke stood, panting and trembling, their bodies drained from the exertion. "It's over," Emma breathed, her heart racing with relief. But as they began to walk back, the air grew heavy again, and they heard a whisper, faint but unmistakable. "You can never be free." Emma froze, the weight of the words crashing over her. They had fought valiantly, but the darkness had a way of lingering, of seeping into their lives. The journey was far from over, but for now, they had won a significant battle. They had each other, and that was a light that could push back even the darkest of shadows. As they made their way back to town, Emma took a deep breath, vowing to keep fighting, to protect the world from the evil that sought to consume it. Together, they would confront whatever darkness lay ahead, knowing that true strength came not from the absence of fear but from the courage to face it head-on.